that we're going to start off with. At some point in the near future, federal agency employees will be returning back to the office. What are 3 steps that an organization can take now to help ensure their staff will work efficiently and safely when they return, possibly even better than before? And with that, we're going to go ahead and start going in alphabetical order, and we're going to be starting with AECOM. Kelly?
Hi there, everyone. Great to be here. So thank you for, up first, no pressure. As far as, we have three succinct steps. There's a lot of detailed steps within those initial 3, but it's the initial or immediate is providing really efficient and detailed and clear disinfectant protocols. And we're using disinfectant intentionally. It's more than just cleaning. It needs to be disinfectant. Along with that, and actually we can go into things like wipes, the appropriate chemicals or materials for cleaning, identifying the quote-unquote hot spots or the high traffic areas, lotions, sanitizers, etc. So all of those kind of cleaning protocols that can be defined, identified, and procured now. The second part would be more of the behavioral protocols, right? And some of the things that have already been or have been part of a comprehensive workplace strategy, the idea of a clean desk policy. Regardless of assigned seating, clean desks help with prevention of leaving papers and materials and other elements where the virus can congregate, if you will. So clean desk policies, phasing protocols is one of the things that we've been talking about in terms of identifying the phases of return, so to limit the amount of folks that are there at any given time. And there's a whole suite of activities or development that should go into that. And then the third one would be kind of analyzing the use of economizer and other return air systems to determine what changes for the air handling systems can be made.
Great, thank you, Kelly. That was great. Okay, let's go on to BHCP. Patrick?
Kelly, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Ryan, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great, Patrick.
Excellent. So today we'll probably listen to what's being shared and maybe share something that hasn't been. Those were great priorities, Kelly. We have 3 that operate, I think, at maybe a little higher level. The first is really to communicate policies and why. And the why is important. 2 is to establish acceptable spatial distance and circulation and be clear, because they'll be coming back into space that they used previously often and will be using it very differently. And then psychological safety and empathy. I think I'm going to begin to drill down on the third one first, because we think this one may be the most important. And from our perspective, psychological safety is important, and really understanding the way the virus is spreading and being able to communicate expectations with empathy and asking good questions prior to coming back, because we may really want to try to meet people where they're at. Listening to people, adjusting accordingly, we think is a big part of framing this whole communication with the workforce. In terms of being ready spatially and defining, we're already looking at not only layouts, but the way you move through space and protocols, as Kelly said, for the way we're going to work differently. And we may be flipping the way space is used. We may be underpopulating enclosed spaces and gathering differently in large spaces. But really determine remote workers and guidelines, who's staying home, who's not, who comes in first, how we stage that, and spatially how we accommodate that. And then lastly, our first point, communication, really determining who needs to come back, communicate when and why. So the first back may seem to some to be the most important people. They need to be back. But what we may find when we phase back the population into the workplace, that because many people are becoming more accustomed to and effective at working remotely, that we won't need to have as many people come back in the office, and we'll have the space we need to provide the proper safety measures, not just distancing, but all the others that come into play, because we won't be as dense in the workplace environment. That's my 2 minutes, I think.
Thank you, Patrick. Jeremy or Rachel from DLR Group.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks. So we've been really bucketing around a few different points. The first, and I think it's been mentioned here by both of them, is just ensuring the psychological safety piece. And the way we're seeing that is through full data transparency. We're working with quite a few people that want to ensure the type of air quality and the type of cleaning and so forth that is happening. And so being able to make that accessible to all your employees so they can see. They don't have to take your trust. They can actually just look and see the facts. So I think that'll be really important. The second thing is use the opportunity right now to survey all the people that are in your workspaces. And I say that because one of the things you asked is how do you even make it better than before? And there's a number of things that people are finding is better right now in their working from home side, and a number of things they missed. And so when we come back, what should that merged version of this look like? And so if you can ask your employees, then you can align that with your culture, which is really important, because it'll be different for every company, for every group. And then the last side is when we start to think about the belt side, how do we do it in such a way that it doesn't feel like it's forced, that we're trying to work the office the same way we did before, but now it's this different world. And so how do we allow for still social and collaborative spaces to happen and do it in such a way that it doesn't feel constrained, but it's encouraging what we still want to happen while maintaining safety. So I think really thinking through those things so it is better and not just trying to be like it was. Let's remember why we like to be in the office in the first place.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Let's go ahead and turn it over to Lee. Lee?
Hi there. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So fantastic job, Kelly, Patrick, and Jeremy. That's great. One of the things we were thinking about in terms of this question was really just kind of an approach, which is for us all about integrated design and integrating integrated thinking. So there are two things I wanted to emphasize. One is this idea of an integrated team participating in the project and setting it up right so that you've got all the right players in the room to help make decisions and to set things up properly. And the second is just around an integrated approach to addressing all the things that we'll be talking about today. Couple things to emphasize on the integrated team. You know, the list includes, it could be very long, but for our own internal purposes, you know, when we're looking at just looking at our own offices, we're including architecture, engineering, interiors, environmental graphics, experiential graphics and wayfinding, right, HR, IT, legal, facilities, office manager, communications. It's a very long list. In fact, even on this call, we have our CHRO because I've talked to her about 6 times a day and really rely on her advice. So I think it's a different kind of team that we're talking about that's a little more expansive. And then addressing approach, space planning, we talked a lot about that already, or I've mentioned that. I'm sure we talked a lot more about today. Occupant engagement, building systems evaluation goes on our list. Experiential design features, helping people safely move through space and nudge them. Furniture, finishes, and fixtures is a big one, kind of looking at cleaning and updating them initially. And then our final thing is just looking at technology, the infrastructure, the hardware, the software. Man, we're relying on it very much now, and we'll continue to do so. So it's a lot of things in this approach that are integrating together that really are going to make it work and make sure that we don't miss anything.
Thank you very much, Lee. All right, let's go over to Gensler. Clark or Janet?
It's going to be Janet.
ahead.
Hey, so what we see is that the roadmap for many of our clients to move forward during this time actually involves about 5 steps. So the first one is about, it's usually focusing on assessing how teams and employees are coping at this point, whether they're thriving or whether they're struggling, and what employees' expectations are related to returning to the office. So this step seems to be especially of interest to those kind of companies or organizations who would like to encourage more telework in the future. And then the next step is about modeling the new norm. This is usually about recognizing that the current event is or could be a catalyst for change. So it's about connecting leaders from across their organizations, like HR, EHS, IT, senior executives, etc., to build a comprehensive view, modeling out what the future of work in their organization might be, what might be the scenarios. Some would adjust the purpose and vision for their workplace to some extent, and use this type of vision and workplace purpose to guide the multiple re-entry scenarios. It could be very deliberate, those sort of things. Step 3 is about design a plan for re-entry. This is where more of the details get ironed out. Who will come back first? How do we prepare the environment, the system, and the services, and the communication, the behavior, etc. Many of the organizations we talk to and work with also have a step 4, which is about start with day 1, recognizing there is a say that every plan is a good one until the first shot is fired, right? We're sort of in a battle. So as teams return to the office, many of the firms are planning to observe and assess how the plan works out and how the circumstances would evolve. And then they would revise and plan accordingly, and also keep an eye on what some of the changes might be more lasting. The last step, nobody's there yet, but many start to think there would be some of the changes would last for a long time, many years to come. So the last step is really about aligning their workplace strategy with these lasting changes. With that thinking in mind, many of the organizations have paused the plans, the projects they're planning or designing because they know some things will change, but at this point, it's still a bit unclear about exactly what will change and how.
Okay. Thank you, Janet. Kay with HOK, are you on?
I am on. Thank you very much, Ryan. So I think what we're doing right now, the very first thing is helping our clients take the opportunity not to go backwards, but to go forward, and to take this opportunity and to really assess what is the purpose of the office. And the first step in that, in a sense, is to balance what work can be done from home and what role should that play, and what should be done in the office and what is that new purpose. And just because you can work from home doesn't mean you should, and just because you can go to the office doesn't mean you should. So helping them really understand what that new balance is so they even really truly get the right people going back in the right way, doing the right things in the office. The second thing is just, sanitation, cleanliness, disinfection, making sure that the environments are safe from a health, safety, and welfare standpoint for the end users when they're coming in. And then the third thing that I think has been touched on, and I really fear is going to be the point that gets lost the most, is addressing the human factor and our personal feelings and how people feel about it, and making sure that we are meeting the basic needs of the individuals, understanding that there's going to be a heightened sensitivity to touch and proximity into our surroundings, understanding there's going to be a heightened anxiety, that trust could be really tested in some of these new environments, and that we need to start looking at how do we enable prospect and refuge? Because we're all going to have a little PTSD, I think, when we come back from this as we go forward. And just really having that empathy and understanding for the human condition is really going to be critical.
Thank you, Kay. Let's see, Jacobs, Tina, Amy, or Kathy? Any thoughts?
Hi, Brian. Hi, this is Amy Manley. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Amy.
Great. Sorry, I just had a little bit of a technical glitch, so I'm just reconnecting. So I think I'm reiterating what some of our colleagues have already shared. I do think that there will be a real focus on defining what is the purpose of place, and that we will be aligning, I think, a sort of a deeper dive into the work activities. If I think about, as strategists, we often begin our assessment phases with understanding how people work and what they do. I think this is a great opportunity for us as organizations to look at the work that people are doing and what work is very tethered and anchored to sites. Work such as that requires high security, people that work in SCIFs, ITAR classified information, manufacturing, and labs, and then really driving to understanding what work might be better distributed. So really understanding the work and work activities so that we can model an approach that is broad and diverse and limits some of the need to return everyone to work. I think we found that there's been some great learnings from this event about distributed work, and that perhaps it does really work well for more concentrated individual work. But we need to be responsive to sort of the unique and human aspects and unique needs that all of our staff will have. Agreeing with Kay on sort of the building of the trust and the human factors. I don't think, and I think that we've all talked about this, I know internally, that our staff and employees need to have great trust in what it is that we're doing, and that they need to feel as though they're going to be safe and secure, and that their wellness is going to be paramount. And I think that that focus will be embedded in all that we do, regardless if it's simply if we look to distributed work or if we look to site-specific work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Jason with Marble Fairbanks.
Hi, yes, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I think Kay hit a lot of the points that I wanted to talk about as well. I think the three steps that we're really looking at is number one, to be flexible. Returning to work isn't going to be like flipping on a switch. We have to acknowledge that the quote-unquote new normal won't be like it was before. Even if things are open, people still feel uncomfortable about leaving their homes or taking mass transit, being in an open space with people who aren't their immediate family. We all know that workplace planning is tending toward a democratization of space where we have fewer private offices and fewer walls and more shared resources. But in the age of COVID, we need to balance that openness and the desire to share with the real necessity to physically distance, which leads to my second point, and that's providing equity and the ability to work remotely. When COVID hit, a lot of employees, I think, were caught off guard with their inability to work from home. This came in the form of physical space, sharing housing with roommates or spouses or children, or technology, not having the right computers or headsets or even Wi-Fi capacity. You can't be productive at home if you don't have the resources that you have available at the office. In our work with institutional clients, public schools, private schools, universities, equity and access is the most important running theme. A lot of us have the luxury of the ability to work from home, but for example, when schools went to remote learning, NPR found at the beginning of April that 40% of the students hadn't even done any of the online learning, most of them simply because they didn't have the resources to make it happen. Employees that struggle from home aren't going to be as productive or effective if they don't have the same tools they have access to at the office. Employers should invest in the employee's ability to work just as effectively from home as they can at the office, or when they come to the office, have a hot seat or availability at their workstation where they can plug into a monitor so they don't need to share a workstation, that they can use their own equipment. Which leads to my third point is investing in touchless infrastructure. I was on a webinar yesterday with a representative from Otis that was describing the way that their company was looking to introduce touchless technology in their vertical transportation to eliminate call buttons, physical call buttons, or using destination dispatch to operate elevators at a specific capacity to help maintain social distancing. I think we need to think about transmissibility the same way that we think about accessibility, like the way that we transitioned from using knobs to using levers on all of our doors, and leverage technology where we can to eliminate contact points. This includes digitizing as much of our physical resources as possible and removing layers of unnecessary technological firewalls.
Great, thank you, Jason. Perkins and Will. Laura?
Yes, hi, thank you. I think the three things that I would think about the steps would be messaging, planning, and evaluating your remote work program. First, with messaging, making sure that employees know that the main objective of the employer is to have a safe return to the workplace. That is the most important thing. I think several people have talked about, empathy and the anxiety and comfort level of different workers. Also looking at messages of positivity to keep people, about ways to keep them connected and engaged. Maybe even employees' stories of care and things that are happening. Corporate efforts during this crisis are always helpful. I think a lot of this really does have to do with, elements of change management and, communication and transparency is a huge part of that. The second element would be planning, both planning for the current transition back as well as thinking towards the future. So in planning for the transition, as we said, a lot of employees might not be ready or feel comfortable coming back into the workplace. I think someone earlier mentioned considering an employee survey to just kind of gauge comfort level. Maybe as we get there, asking for volunteers, that it's not a mandatory thing. Another consideration is, do we need to talk to legal to have employees possibly sign a waiver? And also maybe reconsider if you have unassigned seating now, consider assigned seating during the transition, and ways to make people feel more comfortable. Looking at developing, what is your max capacity in your, by floor to allow people to transition back, or going to, others had mentioned alternating days or weeks or staggering work hours or shifts. And then planning for the future, thinking about operations for new office protocols, around food and beverage, cleaning and maintenance. Maybe even considering strategies from Well or Fitwell that have to do with like UV filters for air and water, things like that. And then the last point about evaluating remote work programs, several people have talked about, the efficiency and or inefficiency of, working from home. So looking at, what should remote work look like for your organization? And, some employees are going to be more effective at home than in the office for certain tasks. Others have mentioned that. But, then also you have the issues of digital isolation and parity. So really kind of evaluating what is your remote work program today and what might that look like in the future.
Thank you, Laura. Mm-hmm. Now we have Skylab. Brent? Brent, I believe you're still on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Brent.
Okay. Thank you. The three items that we've been discussing in terms of steps to take, certainly the sharing a clean workplace plan. I think a lot of the other firms have discussed this, but having open communication about the plan in place and behavioral protocols, also looking at equipment and fresh air and options for night flush within the existing facilities, really an assessment. The other really office density as item 2 is something we're looking at is how can we just do a survey, understand who needs to be critically in the office, who doesn't, who has children and needs flex to be at home. So understanding that sort of pattern of just by reducing half of the people in the office, you can reduce the density in the office, which increases the sense of safety and cleanliness and social distancing. So really looking at what is a flex schedule plan, almost a 50-50 or morning and afternoon schedule to stagger the density of staff in the office. And then another category is restructuring how spaces are used. You know, there's a lot of shift over time to more open spaces, less private office spaces, but there might be opportunities to essentially reevaluate how a room is used or space is used within existing facilities. So looking at, can conference rooms or meeting rooms that are unassigned be spaces that could be assigned for individual use or scheduled? And then also really planning meetings with purpose. So why are we having a meeting? And those rooms have proper social distancing and having more value in physical presence and versus telepresence. And also evaluating private offices. And on one hand, those private offices might provide safety for those individuals in the sense of having their own space, but could population or half of private offices be considered as unassigned, and then in a 50-50 schedule provide more individual space use of resources in existing spaces and facilities to link back with the sense of a shared clean workplace plan. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Brent. Bob with the Smith Group.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. So we had just a few thoughts, and the first one is when we're talking with our clients is to really encourage them to avoid reacting immediately to the what and the how, and actually step back and think a little bit more strategically and ask themselves, why are we coming back? Now that might sound a little crazy, but if we take a step back and say, so what are our goals as an organization, or even as a group that's smaller? What are the values? What are the principles that we're trying to target with our workplace and our organization? And thinking about that initially, it can change the purpose of the workplace for us, in essence, with what's happened. And it gets us thinking a little bit differently about what it means to come back. It might allow us to see the potential flexibility it might allow us to kind of grab that potential flexibility that we're all seeing as we move back. Number two is to then really work hard, especially in the near term, because we're all in a rush to come back and to think about really all the protocols that we need to put in place, is to work really hard to align in the near term our office space with those strategic goals. And it might even, for some organizations or for some groups, it might mean slowing down reentry to make sure that the space that we're setting up aligns with the why we're working together. For example, if I have a group that's really, really collaborative and we're trying to get back into the office space and into the workplace, and our meeting spaces where we collaborate can only fit 4 out of the 15 people that I need, and so the other 9, 10, 11, 12 people all need to be on video conferencing while we're doing this. It might be more effective for us as an organization to slow it down until we can get more people together. That's just kind of as an example. And then the third one would be to kind of reiterate the idea of being more thoughtful and human-centric and have that empathy that people have been talking about. I like to use examples. So the example, working with one organization, they were talking about putting a red X with tape, just using red duct tape and putting a red X on the chairs where people shouldn't sit. And from a process and maybe logistics from the scale of their organization, that might make sense. But I kind of pointed out, so what's it going to feel like when you're sitting there, right, next to a chair that has a red X on it? That red X kind of implies, what, am I the next person to pass away? Or, what does that imply? And so think more carefully about how we do the things that we need to do to be able to move back in. So that's all I've got for now.
Great, thank you, Bob. All right, the last firm for this question is Studios. Christopher.
Hello, everybody. I really appreciated the comments by Patrick in K, particularly because they're where our minds are. The preliminary research that we've done with our clients and ourselves really have helped set our priorities when we look at this. I think the number one thing, and everybody that has talked about empathy will know this, is that we are probably, at least in the near term, the days of universal policies are probably over. This is an individual, this is the time for those of us who deal well with the human beings and the human side of things that come forward. Because the number one thing is people want to come back when they feel comfortable coming back, not when there's something mandated or they feel pressure to do it. So as we've surveyed people, the idea to continue and to be able to work from home until they're more comfortable is almost number one on everyone's list. And then what would make you feel comfortable to the office, and there has almost universally at the top of the list, is a trust in the organization to have a robust plan for this. So I think those two things alone sort of tell you how to approach this. And I think the not business as usual is that particularly large companies are going to have to be much more human-centric and begin to look at individual choices, at easing people's anxiety through this situation. And you guys had a lot of great ideas, and so coming last, I'm going to reiterate what Ryan said. I don't necessarily have to be original when I have 14 great thinkers coming before me, but thanks. Thanks.
Thank you, Christopher. All right, Jane, we have time for, I think, for maybe one, maybe two very brief questions. Do you have any questions out there?
Okay. So yeah, I've been monitoring the chat, and there's a couple of questions that are really, I think, more things that GSA is going to take back to our team regarding HVAC systems and air handling units and things like that. If it comes up later in the conversation, we'll circle back to that for future conversations. So I think that's not something that we want to take the time right now to answer. But what I did want to say is, so I'm pretty sure this will also come up as we go through, but so the question is, how extensive would the physical separation of office furniture be? So obviously we've all been hearing about 6-foot social distancing, and if we have 6 by 6 workstations, that right there is 6 feet, but you know, determining how that furniture configuration looks. So I would open it up really quickly if anybody wants to respond to physical separation of office furniture, unless it's something you plan to speak about as we move forward.
I would suggest, Jane, I was just taking a peek at the second question. That might be something for everyone to expand upon in the second question as we go through.
Are you talking about the operational processes?
Yeah. Yeah. Why don't we go ahead on to the second question, and then we can check with the audience or the attendees, and we can see if it gets adequately addressed.
Perfect.
Yeah. There we go. So question number 2 in studios, and the response order here, what we're going to do is we're going to do a reverse alphabetical order. So Christopher, you're going to be up first. And the question is this: of the various workplace strategies organizations can use in the future, such as increased telework or larger individual workspaces, or even the other types of workplace planning considerations that Jane just mentioned, what strategies do you feel will be adopted more by larger organizations, and why? So again, we'll start with studios and go reverse alphabetical order. Christopher.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Well, we're already seeing this, is that organizations realize that the agility of their offices is somewhat lacking, so it's a good time to fast forward this. But we do believe that the first thing they'll do is address their infrastructure and furniture to how well it can respond to multiple scenarios, not just this one. So I do think some of the interdependencies and rigid distribution of utilities and the way furniture is and all elements of the interior environment are typically looked at now will go through a rethinking. to what is true agility and what is the ability to be agile and reduce or enhance distancing or density much quicker than we have before, and to respond to big changes in the organization and external threats and internal changes in process. I think this is going to help us create these larger, smarter environments, because now we've seen, by not being as agile, some of the difficulties we face. Thanks.
Thank you, Christopher. All right, Bob with the Smith Group.
Sure. So in working with the organizations that we're already talking to about some of this, what we're seeing, at least from my clients, is that the more progressive organizations that place a really strong emphasis on culture of the organization and on working together and on building social kind of bonds between individual people, that they're going to pursue and are talking more about bigger scale or larger scale flexibility rather than permanent work from home kind of models. And this is pretty large organizations, actually, that are doing this, significantly large organizations. And the flexibility model is that they recognize that there's a benefit to being together at times. And it goes back to that statement as to why we're coming back into the office, right? And so they're looking at flexibility as an option where people can either book time, and we're discussing how do you book time back in the office type thing, where I can be back in the office for 2-3 days a week rather than every day. So there's a whole layer of infrastructure and everything that's implied in that statement. The more risk-averse organizations are more of a question mark, actually. You know, the organizations that I work with, they're taking financial hits, so nobody is looking at growing real estate anywhere in the short term. And so the notion of the 6x6, and kind of to answer Jane's question, in the short term is being looked at as targeting certain spaces to work at, and from a safety protocol, enforcing a daily agility, if you will, or a phased approach where you sit in the desk that you're allowed to sit in, and there's a group that are able to come in to the office that come into the office. I don't know what that long-term play is going to look like yet.
Okay, great, thank you. Next up, Brent with Skylo.
Thanks. Yeah, I think similarly, the conversations are underway right now, and we have also are working with some large organizations, and actually a very large ship. They're both still under construction and proceeding. And I think in the future, this question of flexibility and what is, in a sense, the home office might be the office in private space and heads down space, and the office is really like the shared space, and why do we come together physically and meet? And it almost might redefine, in a sense, that, you know, what is the unassigned private office in the office, and then the amount of real estate organizations really need to function and collaborate. So I think there is this sort of concept, if you have existing space, you almost need twice as much space unless you do shift to a more progressive and flexible schedule, which cuts your density down, or you're moving to new spaces, and then those spaces are really about why do people come together. So I think we might see people actually shifting into new spaces in future leases that are really more about shared space and less about individual space.
Okay. Thank you, Brent. Laura with Perkins and Will.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I really think this pandemic has caused truly a paradigm shift in the way that we look at workplace. I mean, we know that the reason we go into the office really is for face-to-face connection and collaboration, because many times, you know, a lot of people can be more productive at home for focused work. So I think some of the strategies that we'll be looking at in the future, you know, are some that we've looked at in the past, like adaptability and flexibility, which others have mentioned. And, you know, to me, that's really looking at it through a resilient lens, taking kind of a resilient approach to space, you know, and thinking about it that way. As others have said, I can't imagine that people are going to go back to taking more, you know, larger footprints of space just, you know, to have more distance. I feel like, there will be increased telework because, as we've gone through this almost forced pilot of, people working remotely, and they've discovered, we do have the tools, there is the technology, to work effectively remotely and stay connected and collaborate. So I think there will be an increase in telework. I feel that when people are in the workplace, we'll continue to look at what we've talked about from a strategic standpoint for years of choice, choice within the workspace. So you have those areas for focus work, teamwork, and, with the idea of hoteling and desk sharing, will come new policies and procedures and protocols around, clean desk and maintenance, communication about cleaning schedules so that employees know, that either spaces have been cleaned at certain times, in more access to personal cleaning cleaning supplies, that they can clean their own, clean a desk before they sit down in a chair so that they feel comfortable because they know they've done it themselves. And I think some of the strategies that are really going to go to support this are leveraging virtual skills. And some of the things I've heard recently working with an agency in focus groups is just, with an agency where they do have a lot of telework, that when people are calling in for meetings where people are in person, they don't always feel like they're in a level playing field. So, having more of the video conference in ways that people can connect visually, and employing strategies for people to be able to, break into conversations so you feel like you're part of, that collaboration group or that meeting. I think we'll see develop new guidelines around face-to-face meetings, and I think people will start to think more about things like well and fit well and health and well-being strategies and how those really can contribute to the future of the workspace.
Thank you, Laura. Jason with Marble Fairbanks.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I think Laura touched on a lot of these ideas. As was mentioned before, I think providing a range of options for workers is going to be key moving forward. There is always going to be a need for a physical common space. We've discussed this internally at our office a lot about the necessity of having the office as a physical place and not dissolving that into the cloud. I don't think the office as we know it is going away anytime soon, but the way we interface with the office will certainly be different. This is going to be through increased telework or more mobile or distributed workforce, or spaces that are even easier to adapt in a time of pandemic or emergency. I also think we need to think about what the pandemic has shown as it relates to other crises that we're facing in the world, namely climate change. I think it's been very interesting to see how carbon emissions have reacted to this new kind of normal that we're all experiencing right now. I think that providing options to remote work to reduce commuting times will possibly shrink the physical footprint of this actual office and help us address issues of environmental resiliency and climate change. But we also need to acknowledge the social importance of the workplace, the serendipitous encounters, the exchanges and collaborations that happen when we're all in the same place. I know our office has tried to maintain that through an open chat channel that we have ongoing that anyone can jump into to have sort of offhand conversations. We also schedule virtual lunches that are done by GoTo or Zoom so that we can all maintain some sense of downtime during the workday. It's important to remember that work is not 100% work during the workday. The time spent in between at the water cooler or at lunch is oftentimes just as important. So I think designing that new space, whether it's virtual or otherwise, is going to be really key. And the last point is I think figuring out the best ability for mentorship in this new reality is going to be really important for all organizations. Our office is a teaching studio, so one-on-one learning is really important for professional development. Someone that's been working for 30 years has different expectations about work and what a workday means than someone fresh out of school. So the ability to still maintain that ability to mentor is still going to be key in whatever sort of space we design in the future.
Great, thank you, Jason. All right, Tina, Amy, or Kathy from Jacobs, you're up.
Hi, Ryan. This is Amy Manley. I'll be addressing question 2.
Okay.
Actually, many of the strategies that our team has been considering are very similar to those that we've heard. One of the things, and Jason just mentioned this, is that we have found that that this new way of working will require a range of responsive solutions, that the strategies that organizations deploy will need to be adaptable and flexible for business and operational continuity. But we also are responding to sort of the unique needs of our workers, that we have found that we all have different styles of work. We've known that. But given this pandemic and we have families with children at home, and that may not be forever, but each person has begun to understand that they may work, that they actually can work differently. And so how do we create a strategy within large organizations that's responsive to all of our people's needs, as well as that long-term resiliency and for our business and operation? And there will also, we've been looking at that there will need to be sort of not only global responses, but local and regional responses that adapt and address the cultural and infrastructure issues in a variety of different places at what time. One, an approach that may be very suitable for urban United States may not be suitable for places in, the UK or EMEA or Asia Pac, that even within the United States, urban versus rural versus suburban locales may just need to be adapting an approach and allow that to happen. We also are thinking that perhaps if this truly is the paradigm shift that many of us in workplace strategies have been thinking should have happened years ago, to looking at a distributed and task-based approach to work, will perhaps organizations begin to move to more of a center or hub methodology for work, and that if most of our knowledge workers can work in a distributed fashion most of the time, but need to come together for ideation and co-creation, client presentations, and even to Jason's point, kind of that need for social connectedness, are places responding to that rather than a place where I go daily. And then do we respond specifically to sites that have those unique functions that I talked about earlier, lab and science, learning, and security reasons, so that it limits staff at any one site, but then is sort of uniquely responsive. And then lastly, one of the things that our group's been talking about with strategies is that they'll truly be driven by culture. They'll be very culture and people-centric, and that they'll be committed to not only the sort of corporate and social and environmental responsibility of an organization, but also the sort of the social systems and unspoken rules and values and norms on how work gets done within an organization. And to the point of sustainability, we have found within Jacobs that, we have limited so much travel for client work or from site to site that it's helping us meet our goals for our climate action plan to be net carbon zero within the next 10 years, and there's a series of other interstitial sorts of goals for that. But we're seeing this as an opportunity to actually be able to make a difference to the climate by reducing travel for 55,000 people globally. And so we believe that other organizations will find the same benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Kay, HOK.
Okay, so I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I'm willing to bet every person on this call probably agrees with most of what has been said today about we've all been on this island that has said the office should be different, right? That there's a balance between what you can do from home and maybe heads down concentrative work, and then there's a reason you come to the office, and maybe we should be redesigning the office to be more of a gathering space and a social space and rethinking that. So I'm willing to bet we all agree with that. The challenge here is that now the rest of the world has finally figured out what we've probably known for years, and now we are in a position to be able to deliver on that. So that's the exciting thing. Now I'm going to go a little bit farther out on the limb. I'm going to answer the question before about physical distancing. I'm just going to point out, I think there's a massive flaw in what everybody is doing, drawing little circles around people as far as social distancing goes. First of all, the rules around this are very loose, and this is really, truly an unprecedented situation. Second of all, 90% of what we're seeing is making the assumption that when you're sitting at your desk, you just kind of transport there and you never move. All of those plans are for naught the second somebody gets up and starts walking around the space. So if you've got people that are internally mobile and they have to get out and they're walking through somebody else's sphere of safety, it's kind of for naught. So we really need to think more holistically rather than just drawing circles around desks and say, we're good, you're not within 6 feet of somebody. I think the other thing is, and I'm going to go farther out on the limb and say that we are still strong proponents of unassigned working, because one of the very first things that happened is everybody rushed and said, okay, everybody's got to have their own desk. But what they found in Asia and what we firmly believe is people want options and choices now more than ever. And I don't want to be told I have to sit in a desk that might be right next to somebody when there's 5 other desks available. I want to choose. And the workplace is one of the few places on the planet where we as people can't walk in and make a decision after assessing the situation about where we want to be for our own personal comforts. And so we believe that with technology and other things, we can signal what's available, we can block out spots, we can say this spot was sat on, it needs to be cleaned, it goes orange until somebody cleans it, and then it gets freed again. And that we're better off in smaller groups of people, because I want to pick up on something Amy said about hubs. One of the biggest challenges that we're having now is how do you contain this? If we have big floor plates with lots of people and people are moving all around, if one person gets sick, they could literally infect everybody on that floor because of exposure. And so if we have smaller neighborhood-based choice environments, that you have options and choices in that zone, and you can control a little bit how much interaction you have with that greater group until we get beyond this critical period, it can actually help control contagion. And that takes it even farther to, if I have 1,000 people in the workplace and one person gets sick, now everybody, they were walking all around and went into the bathroom, now everybody has to go home for 2 weeks. Is it smarter for a period of time to have hubs? I mean, think about all the co-working spaces that are now going to become available, right, or all those spaces. Convert those to hubs where people can don't have to commute as far, because commuting is going to be a nightmare because nobody's going to want to be in public transportation. They can go to something more local, and rather than having 1,000 people in one place, I have 10 places that might have 100 people. I can control the commute a little bit more, and if somebody gets sick in one place, 100 people have to go home for a few weeks, not an entire 1,000-person floor. So that's the limb that I'm way out on right now, and I'll pass it over to the next.
Okay, thank you, Gay. Clark or Janet from Gensler?
Hey, thanks, Ryan. And this is such a rich conversation with lots and lots of great thinking. I'm just gonna start to put some things in between some of the big ideas that I think, to Kay's point, we all pretty much agree on here. Looking at first a short-term perspective for use in the office, continued provisional social distancing protocols and communication and change management related to that. One of the things about the short term, we've all had some intensive introduction and practice at the use of some of these remote gathering technologies, and to one of Kevin Kempfer's questions, how to further improve on that with use of some agreed etiquettes within a meeting that involves people from a number of different locations, level set. So everybody's either on video. If somebody can't be on video, then everybody drops off of video so that everybody's on a common playing field. Helps a lot with that. Then if we look at other specific short-term ideas, there's been some of the thoughts include introducing shift work. One of the challenges with shift work, which certainly drives a higher utilization over time of the office place, but introduces some supervisorial and workflow challenges with coordination and management there. Employee confidence, I think, is really central to particularly the short term, and then bridging into the medium term. We'll see a continued use, if not really solidification of use of working from home as part of a robust strategy. Part of what I think we will see is a continued investment in technologies, including cloud-based technologies, and shifting more documentation to the cloud that will relieve some of the challenges that some government employees have with essential documentation that they're not able to access because it's locked in the office and they can't get to it, so they can't get their work done. So cloud-based solutions, I think, will become increasingly in play here. Relative to the question of face-to-face versus remote work, one of the things that we see, and I think this is a medium-term adaptation, is some of the benefits of the in-person face-to-face meeting is really very effective with exploratory thinking as part of an innovation process. The cognitive function of people being physically together is enhanced by the parallel rhythms of movement. There's spatial literacy aspects of this that are sort of negated by the remote participation through a flat screen video. Barbara Tversky at Stanford has a lot to say about this. Really excellent point of reference there. Longer term, I anticipate some experimentation on the part of organizations and agencies, in particular technology applications that might enable remote access to some specialty support spaces, such as labs and other mission critical spaces that are so essential to government operations. The long term, so much is fluid. It's so difficult to put a solid point on any of these things other than a continuing emergence of good solutions. And again, going back to highlight technology as an enabler is going to be more important than ever.
Okay, thank you, Clark. Lee with EYP.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. I had to call back in. Couple things. One, I think, we talked before, I was mentioning before this idea of an integrated team and expanding the team. I really think that's an important part of making this all work is real estate and facilities becoming best friends with HR and IT. Right now within GSA and within a lot of your customer groups, they're totally siloed off. They don't talk to each other. I know there have been initiatives to integrate. Never before have we needed them so badly and integrate with them. And a couple things, on the HR side, we've been talking about the kind of enhanced role of employee relations. Employees are stressed. We mentioned that earlier, with kids at home and uncertainty. This group is going to need to be part of the process because they're going to help prepare and support managers, helping them figure out how to support individuals and teams, wrestle through all kinds of issues, coming back to work or not coming back to work. It's just back to the individual. There are just a lot of factors that need to be integrated, and we feel like that's a really great player to have at the table. The other thing I was thinking about around technology is, and lots of it has been mentioned already, which is great. It is a very exciting time for technology, and the pressure, the market demand is going to help us on this front. I think one thing, though, at the very basic level is, you've got folks working from home and you've got them working in the office flexibly, right, sometimes, whatever that means, But do they need two sets of equipment? If we get into the basics around what a lot of GSA's customers are dealing with, they're issued one phone, which is great, but are they issued, two keyboards and two sets of two monitors and, all the tools that they need to be able to work in multiple places and to be able to feel comfortable and have what they need without sharing too much equipment. And I just think that's a really practical budgetary consideration. Hopefully with some of this sharing, we're going to save some space, so maybe it's moving out of one bucket into another. But the other thing I was thinking about a lot was just, and we've all been wrestling around with this idea of occupancy sensors that share health performance indicators. Someone mentioned earlier this idea of walking into a space and knowing how dense it is, whether it's a hub or a mini hub within the hub, or being able to know that you're walking into a space that doesn't have as many people is important, but also walking into a building that has met XYZ criteria. I know they're posting a lot of this stuff in China, and I'd be just really interested in seeing more of that, because I think we're at a point where people can put on wearables and they can tell a lot of information, or put little devices on their desks and tell a lot of information, sensor information. So I think the GSA getting ahead of that, and as opposed to having to react to it when people say, my air quality is such and such, to be able to say, oh no, we've already measured this systemically, and we know why, and let us tell you how to work through that. Just working through those fears is going to be really, really important, but also empowering people to manage their own day, as we mentioned before, leveraging technology for that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lee. All right, DLR, Jeremy or Rachel?
Yeah, thanks. Kay, I think you hit on a lot of things. I'm right on the same page as you. We're often thinking about, we'll often ask the workplace to take care of all the different work modes that people go through in a day. And I think what we're going to see is the office now extends to the home. And so when we start to think about doing heads down, quiet work, that might be better to be done at home. And as we kind of have been talking about, 100% agree that the office can be rethought to be the space where social and collaborative spaces happen. And so rethinking conference rooms to be more specific for the type of collaboration we want to happen, I think will be a big change to the office, one that I'm excited that we've all been talking about. I think the other thing that we'll see is kind of a more universal thinking applied to the office, like how do we get rid of doors into bathrooms? Do you take it like you do in an airport? One-way paths, just removing barriers in general, I think will be important, just so we can start to flow around the office. And there's a lot of things that we probably should have been doing anyway, but didn't for a number of reasons, that I think will be really helpful. Otherwise, I think a lot of the other big points have been hit already.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. All right, Patrick, BHTP, what do you have?
Yeah, thanks. Realizing the challenge of the first group that went last, and really love what I'm hearing. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out even further, because I feel like a lot of folks are on the limb of this tree, and I'm just going to look at the tree. And I think looking at this right now, we're reaching out and networking with thought leaders, roundtables with clients. I think we all are a bit. And starting to do scenario planning, because every organization is different. And these strategies that we're talking about in the second question could ruin or transform organizational culture. And we all have gifts to give relative to scenario planning, because design thinking starts with empathy. And we all have been talking about the importance of that. So first, understand the people then understand the work, then strategize and design accordingly. So to Lee's point, understand the people of partnership with HR, critical. Everybody's situation is different. Understand the work. That partnership with IT is going to be absolutely critical. So build those bridges now while you're learning, and harvest that learning later, and then strategize and design accordingly. We really have to understand where the business is going, because you're going to have to pick your journey, because the journey is going to be different. First off, I think we're looking at, so what have we learned? And just personally, because we're all going through this together, we've learned a lot that we want to bring back to the workplace, because we're all still working. One of the things we've learned is we've quadrupled communication with clients and internally. Some people have said they feel more connected now than before. That's a good thing. We're looking at our culture, and it took us 2 weeks and we're all working remote fine, to realize, whoa, we better start an initiative now to see if we're able to maintain and transform our culture through this and not ruin it. And then lastly, I think, and more importantly, we have to have pre-vaccine and post-vaccine thinking when we're doing strategies, because we don't want to, completely change and then suddenly it changes again. So let's make sure we're deliberate about the way we play out those strategies. It's great conversation, learning while we go.
Thank you, Patrick. I believe, Jane, I just want to do another quick check. I believe AECOM had to drop off for another commitment. Is that still correct?
Looks like it, yep.
Okay, all right, so let's go. So we only have about 12 minutes left, so we're going to do something a little bit differently. First, I want to encourage everyone to still continue sending your questions by chat, but rather than pose those to our panel, what we're going to do is the Total Workplace program is going to take those back and do some internal investigation on all those questions. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and go into question number 3 for our panel. And this one's going to be a bit of a lightning round. I've been sort of doing the averages, and Jane, why don't you go ahead and go on to the next slide. And what we're going to do, the response order is going to be a bit different. We took the list, cut it down the middle, put the bottom half on top, and switch things around. So Jacob, you're going to be up first. And rather than the 2 minutes per firm that's indicated there, think of it more like 45 seconds to a minute instead. And here's the question. What key insights can you share with GSA as we continue working on our return to the office planning? Again, about 45 seconds to a minute, and the first one up is Jacob's.
Hi, this is Tina Kalinsky. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Tina.
Okay, great. First is to continue to communicate clearly and carefully beyond reopening. Don't stop your communication plan too early, because you have to manage that fear. Once people come back to the office and they deem it unsafe, they're going to leave again. The other key insight is look past day one response for your long-term plans. We don't know. I mean, right now people are going to make plans and policies based on what we're living in today, but we don't know what year 1 and year 5 is going to look like. So, maintain that flexibility and adaptability as we go on. No one at this point can even predict what year 5 is going to look like. And we all know that one universal approach is not going to work for everyone. So be adaptable and agile. Monitor what you're doing now and leverage that real-time data. And I think the last thing is that despite the unfortunate circumstances, this is a great human and work experiment that we're living in. And we have an opportunity now to mold the workplace, because organizations are going to need to make changes, and those changes are going to be immediate. So seize the moment and don't let complacency and fear allow you to jump to long-term conclusions that aren't going to work for you in the future. And as I heard on CNN last night, good public health is good business, and I think that's going to be the driver for the near-term future.
Great, thank you very much. Jason with Marble Fairbanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I'll be quick. There's going to be hiccups and things won't be normal for a very long time. When we move from private offices to open offices, there are a lot of open offices that just don't work because they aren't designed. You can't put a bunch of people at a table in a big room, call it an open office, and expect them to be happy or productive as they were in their private offices. These spaces need to be designed, and they have to have adequate shared support spaces in order for them to be successful. Similarly, you can't just put everyone on Zoom all day and expect them to be as happy or productive as they were at the office. The virtual space needs to be designed as well. It's important that the workspace of the future is designed as a combination of both the virtual and the physical space. I think we're all very excited about this possibility, and we haven't even touched on virtual reality yet. I think that's something for another discussion.
Thank you, Jason. All right, Laura with Perkins & Will.
Yes, I'm going to touch on 2 quick points that really are focused more on the transition back. One is consider how temporary measures for the transition might affect accessibility, like the ADA considerations. If we're putting up temporary visual signs or directional things, that just as a consideration that it may be more difficult to think about that from people who have disabilities being able to see or access or have access to the cleaning supplies and things like that. The second being, as we hear all of this about cleaning and, non-touch, there seems to be a conflict between infectious control and long-term sustainability. So as we go back to the workplace in the transition mode, thinking about, should we use single-use items and not be sharing mugs, bring your own to the office. A lot of us use dishwashers and dishes and things so that we are reusing, but maybe in the temporary we don't do that. And then also thinking about, the harms of cleaning supplies and things like that, and looking for more natural items, and how we can think about cleanliness in that way to also support long-term sustainability.
Thank you, Laura. Brent with Skylab.
One of the big key insights is really flexibility and just understanding how do we share information. We're maximizing that through technology. And then how do we really evaluate the quality of our time when we get together as teams and collaborate. So I think there's just a real focus around how do we take a hard look at spaces we have and understand what they're used for, and really plan with flexibility for the office and all the people working in the workspace who are there and or teleworking, but what's the purpose of being there? So I think there could be planning efforts around how our space is used, at what times, and just having flexible schedules, because this is essentially an experiment and how we have to reevaluate and test our work patterns. And I think for the long term, that could result in better use of time, higher quality product, and being more connected with information sharing and better technology use.
Thank you, Brent. All right, Bob with the Smith Group.
Okay. One thing that comes to our mind, and it's pretty time sensitive for all the organizations that we're working with, it might already start to be on the verge of too late, is change management preparation. Just taking the time to figure out how we need to train and teach and prepare our staff for coming back to something that might not be the same. It's likely not going to be the same as what they were used to, both in the short term and in the long term. So just thinking through that and preparing a strategy, not just communicating, but thinking about how to train, if you will.
Thank you very much, Bob. Christopher with Studios.
Great, thank you. I think for us, the primary thing is that we have this very rare moment in time that hopefully will never be repeated, that really strong data collection now to understand how people cope through this period or a period of uncertainty and change is really critical. It tells us what fears are heightened, what people's priorities are, and what coping mechanisms they use. And we can use that information going forward to understand how those things shift and are reprioritized as you move in the future. So I think that we have a very rare moment, maybe a month, to take information that could so help us in the future. And I know Studios is beginning gathering that data at quite a rapid pace in order to, one, support our clients. And I just heard change management, which is off the charts, driving us our work up these days. And so I just want to throw that out. It's the immediate opportunity to get really great data.
Excellent point, Christopher. All right, we're going to go ahead and go down to BHDP. Patrick?
Yeah, Christopher and Bob, great comments. I mean, I'll pick up on where you guys left off. I mean, with change, there's going to be a lot of fear, and most fear is fear of the unknown. So I would make, to the extent possible, because there's a lot of unknown, just within the context of your organization, make the known known and be honest and open with that. Connected to that is communication is two ways. So I would agree, Christopher, build a feedback loop now. And it's a feedback loop that also includes connecting with people. That's the mentoring part. We find clients, we are also within our organization doing mentoring in small groups and one-on-one and trying to recraft that so that it is more immediate, more effective, so that we can get into those deeper conversations that you can't cover in a survey. But to the point of a survey, you know, policy, we usually look at policy as restricting, but there is no freedom without constraint. So I'm looking at policy in a new sort of counterintuitive way that maybe through better policy we can gain more flexibility so that people know when they need to be in or out, when they can work from home or not, what technology they can use and do they have it. So looking at policy almost in a new way as we learn from our people, I think it's going to be important.
Thank you, Patrick. DLR Group, Jeremy or Rachel?
Yeah, that was great, Patrick. I totally agree with the policy piece. I guess that the three big things I'd leave is, I think transparency and sharing data is more important than ever before, just so everybody knows. We want to make sure that as our employees come back and these cleaning policies are put in place, that they know that they're being aerated overnight, cleaned out, so we're coming back and not creating a different health problem that we're going to deal with because we're using toxic chemicals and so forth. I think the second thing is it's really important that whatever response people are putting in place, it aligns with your company culture and not employing what Google or Facebook is doing into an environment that maybe doesn't work the same way. So that's really important. And then, as it's been mentioned, design for both the pre-vaccine and post-vaccine world. So allow for disassembly, flexibility, you know, make it so pieces can be reused and not tossed in 5 years and rethought again.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. Lee, EYP.
So for all of you from the GSA, you may or may not be aware of this, but our government clients are the most active right now. Just speaking as a leader at EYP and where the work is coming in. Our government clients are really active, and you guys are way more prepared than clients in our other sectors who are really just trying to figure out how to rebuild their businesses. And that's, healthcare and higher ed. I mean, they are just reeling. So I guess maybe this is kind of a call to action, but you all have an opportunity to, number one, provide some stability for the design and construction industry, and we greatly appreciate it, believe me. And two, you have the opportunity to set the bar really high and lead when it comes to future work and how high-performance buildings can truly improve work, health, sustainability, reduce costs, and do it all. And I guess my challenge to you is to challenge us. We are scared like everyone else, but and fear the future. But we're as designers, this is a design problem, and we are loving it. So please bring it on.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Clark or Janet Hensler?
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everybody, for all of the thoughtful comments. Just a couple quick final thoughts. One, GSA and all government agencies really should be considering the employee's whole day experience as part of the planning, both short-term and longer-term. Public transit, daycare, homeschooling, and all these things are outside the immediate control of the agency, but directly impact each individual's experience and their ability to make it to the office. And so thoughtful planning includes looking at a whole day perspective. Just to reiterate, the adaptive scenario planning for short, mid, and long-term scenarios, super important at this point, given all of the unknowns that we're all needing to take into consideration. And then one last plug for continued investment on the part of government in moving to cloud-based technologies to improve and enhance organizations' effectiveness and satisfaction levels with working from anywhere. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Clark. And Kay from HOK.
If we all had $1 for every time somebody asked us what the workplace of the future would be and then ignored what we said, we'd all be rich. We now have a catalyst that is actually going to make people have to stand up and listen to what we're saying, because I'd like to believe that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. May not be, though, going forward. But we don't often have a situation to really stop and think, what do we truly want the workplace of the future to be? And what has terrified me in the last few weeks is seeing some people panicking and rushing back to 1970s with throwing up panels and sneeze guards and all this stuff that doesn't necessarily have any proven science behind it. We have an opportunity to be the voice of reason, to take a collective breath and to say, what do we want the workplace of the future to be? And what are all those things like the gig economy and work-life balance and artificial intelligence and augmentation and automation that are already on the horizon that are going to hit us next, and to just embrace those now, bring them into the fold, and move everybody forward 10 years versus going backwards. So that would be our challenge to everybody on the call.
Thank you, Kay. Well, that pretty much concludes our roundtable for this afternoon, the morning/afternoon. What we're going to do is we will make sure either Jane or myself or someone else from the Total Workplace PMO will let everyone know when the recording is available. Thank you. Profound thanks to our industry partners for joining us and providing all these great insights. I'm sure you'll be hearing from us soon and a bit more often in the very near future about these topics. With that, I'm going to go ahead and say this concludes our Future Workplace in a Post-COVID-19 World Roundtable, and I hope everyone has a safe and a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan,
so much,
for your
everyone.
radio voice.
Thanks, everyone.